The hearing was supposed to be routine, predictable. Another day of suits and sound bites where nothing real ever gets said and no one really listens. The kind of day where everything feels rehearsed, even the outrage. The kind of day where stories of struggle are reduced to statistics and lived pain is met with polite nods. But then Jasmine Crockett walked in, and something shifted. It wasn't the click of her heels. It wasn't her tone. It was her presence. Still, focused, unapologetically alert. She didn't need to raise her voice to announce herself. The air just changed, like the room knew it was about to be confronted with something it couldn't dodge. Some of them tried not to look up. Others glanced quickly, already bracing for what they called a scene. But it wasn't a scene. It was a reckoning. She took her seat like she knew every inch of that space was earned, not given. And when her mic turned on, it wasn't just audio, it was a shift in gravity. The room had planned to coast. She came to disrupt. They were prepared for protocol. She came with purpose. And even before she said a word, the powerful felt it. Not fear but discomfort. The kind that only shows up when someone dares to speak what you've worked hard to ignore. They didn't want her to speak. That much was clear before she even opened her mouth. You could see it in the way they adjusted their ties, tapped their pens, glanced sideways at each other like a warning signal had gone off. The way they whispered behind folders, traded smirks, past glances that said, "Here we go again." They'd seen women like her before, sharp, direct, unwilling to play the game. And every time, they followed the same tired routine. Interrupt. Redirect. Diminish. They buried voices like hers under piles of protocol, under fake politeness and phrases like point of order. They didn't need a gavel to silence someone. All they needed was a rule book and a room full of people pretending not to hear. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to be heard. She came to be felt. And that's what they didn't expect. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't scan the room for approval. She leaned into the mic like it owed her space. And in that moment, the smirks faded. Because she didn't speak with the desperation of someone hoping to be taken seriously. She spoke like someone who knew they already were. They tried to brace themselves, tried to anticipate her angle, but they weren't prepared for what she brought. Not just facts, not just stories. She brought confrontation wrapped in clarity, a mirror they couldn't look away from. They wanted control. She came for accountability. They came to manage. She came to dismantle. And when she began, it wasn't just noise she cut through, it was years of quiet compliance they had grown comfortable with. The silence before her words wasn't respect. It was fear dressed up in professionalism. Because deep down, they knew the moment she started, they wouldn't be able to stop her. The first time they interrupted her, she didn't flinch. She paused, not the kind of pause that comes from losing your place, but the kind that says, "I see you." Her eyes scanned the table, locked briefly on the man who had cut her off mid-sentence with a half smile and a dismissive cough. She let the moment hang in the air, giving him space to feel his own discomfort. Then she picked up exactly where she left off, as if the interruption didn't deserve the dignity of a reaction. But when it happened again, when a different voice tried to derail her with a procedural jab masked as a question, she didn't just pause. She leaned in, slowly, purposefully. And that's when the room started to shift. "You can't silence what's true just because it makes you uncomfortable," she said, her voice even, like steel wrapped in velvet. No raised tone, no shaking hand. Just words that landed like bricks on polished desks. She wasn't there to win a moment. She was there to expose the rot they'd all gotten used to sitting in. The room didn't go quiet right away. No. It fought her, cuffed, shuffled. Someone even chuckled nervously as if trying to lighten the weight she had just dropped on them. But the resistance was paper thin, and she saw right through it. She didn't let up, didn't fold, didn't retreat into the niceties expected of her. She held her ground, like the truth itself was standing behind her, daring anyone to challenge it. And that's when the real silence crept in. Not because she demanded it, but because the room finally understood she wasn't there to ask for space. She was there to take it. And no one, and not with all their rules and rank and rehearsed rebuttals, could take it back. She began to speak of things they never wanted named, not because they didn't know, but because naming them meant owning them. She spoke of the schools that still had lead in their pipes, of neighborhoods where ambulances take 30 minutes to arrive, of apartment buildings with mold on the ceilings and rats in the walls. She spoke of grandmothers raising 3 grandkids on Social Security checks, of single fathers working night shifts who still got eviction notices, of entire communities where hope had become a rumor. She spoke of people who paid their dues, every tax, every vote, every ounce of trust, and were repaid with silence, with delay, with neglect, dressed up as bureaucracy. And she didn't say it like a politician. She didn't pause for applause or glance at notes to land a line. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to survive the moment. She was trying to break it open. Every sentence was a blade, clean and deliberate. Every word stripped the gloss off the polished wood of that room, revealing the rot beneath it. The names she said weren't statistics. They were stories. Real, living proof of everything the room pretended wasn't happening. And the most striking part? She never raised her voice. Not once. But the weight of her words made the walls feel smaller. One by one, those who'd been waiting for their turn to speak found themselves listening, instead uneasy, unsure, silent. The usual scripts no longer fit. The usual rebuttals felt hollow. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't asking for favors. She was holding up the truth like a mirror, and every person in that room had to look into it whether they were ready or not. No one could look away, not because they were captivated, but because they were cornered. They tried to brush her off the way they always, dow with smirks, too rehearsed to be casual, with quiet mutters and side-eye glances passed across the table like inside jokes. One of them leaned back in his chair, arms folded like her words were a performance he'd already seen. Another tapped his pen with the rhythm of someone counting down until she was done. Someone else whispered to a staffer and chuckled, not even trying to hide it. This was their tactic: make her feel small without ever saying it outright. Drown her in protocol. Cut her off with point of order. Flip through papers, while she spoke like her words were nothing more than background noise. But Jasmine wasn't playing that game. She didn't shrink. She didn't fumble. She didn't fill the silence with apologies. She sat straighter, locked eyes with one of the smirking faces. And then she said it, low and deliberate. "You've had generations to speak. Let me finish 5 minutes without interruption." And for the first time that day, the room didn't push back. No procedural objections, no coughing fits meant to drown her out. Just stillness. Because something in the way she said it, a calm so sharp it sliced through the air, made them pause. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was a line drawn in granite. And even the ones who prided themselves on never giving an inch felt it. This was not someone they could talk over. Not today. Not anymore. Then she told the story, not a headline, not a statistic, but a wound that never healed. A woman in her district who held her feverish toddler in the back seat of a borrowed car, speeding down a dark highway, praying with every mile. The closest hospital was 30 miles away. They made it to the parking lot, but the child didn't. And when she begged the nurse for help, they told her there was no pediatric unit, no specialist, no backup, just paperwork and regret. The mother buried her child 2 weeks later with a bill she couldn't pay, and questions no one in power ever answered. Then came the man. His name was Darnell. He worked 3 jobs: janitor in the morning, delivery driver in the afternoon, gas station clerk at night. He barely slept. He didn't complain. He just tried. But no matter how many hours he worked, the math never added up. Rents kept rising, and landlords didn't take apologies. He made too much for assistance, too little for survival. The day he got evicted, he called her office for help, but just to be heard. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't slam her hand on the table. She just spoke, steady as a heartbeat. Her voice didn't shake, because it didn't have to. The stories carried themselves, heavy and whole. You could see it on the faces across the room, the ones who thought they were just attending another hearing. They weren't. They were standing in the middle of someone else's lived reality. One they couldn't ignore or spin or smother under buzzwords. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't embellish it. She just laid it bare. And in that silence that followed, it wasn't her voice echoing, it was the truth, louder than anything that had come before. And then came the moment that broke the room, not with volume, but with precision. Jasmine Crockett looked up from her notes, looked past the rows of nameplates and water bottles and rehearsed expressions, and locked eyes with the committee chair. No trembling voice, no hesitation, just fire wrapped in calm. "When was the last time," she asked, "you stepped into a neighborhood where kids dodged stray bullets on their walk to school?" The words hit like a punch no one saw coming. The room stilled, not politely, but completely. You could feel the breath leave it. A few heads turned toward the chair, waiting to see if he'd shift in his seat, flinch, blink. He didn't. But he didn't answer either, because how could he? She didn't give him time to recover. She kept going. "You legislate lives you've never lived," she said. And this time her voice was heavier. Not louder, just heavier, like it had gathered the weight of every mother who kept her child close at the sound of sirens. Every father who triple-checked locks before bedtime. Every teacher who made sure their students knew where to hide when a noise outside didn't sound right. She wasn't accusing, she was exposing. Not just one man, but a system that makes decisions from behind gates and podiums, far from the cracked sidewalks and broken streetlights they write laws about. She wasn't asking for empathy, she was demanding proximity, and in that moment, the people on that committee weren't policymakers. They were spectators to a truth they never wanted to witness. And Jasmine made sure they did. The air cracked open like glass under pressure, quiet, but sharp enough to cut. No one moved. Not a shuffle, not a breath too loud. The sound of pens scribbling, pages flipping, chairs creaking gone. It was as if time itself hit pause. The silence wasn't the kind that fills awkward gaps in conversation. It wasn't the silence of waiting or confusion. It was the silence of impact. The kind that crashes in after truth has been spoken too clearly to ignore. This wasn't discomfort, it was revelation. The room sat in it like a weight had dropped onto the table, something too heavy to lift and too real to pretend away. For once, the titles didn't matter. The seniority didn't matter. The party lines didn't matter. Jasmine Crockett had torn through the script, and now they were all just people staring at a mirror none of them had asked to see. They weren't avoiding her words because they disagreed. They were avoiding them because they knew she was right. And when someone finally says the thing that's been building just beneath the surface layered in years of silence, delay, and polite indifference, it doesn't sound like politics anymore. It sounds like truth. And truth doesn't need to yell. It just needs to be said once, clearly, for the room to fall quiet. One congressman, clearly uncomfortable with how still the room had become, tried to change the subject. He coughed into his mic, shifted in his seat, and began a sentence about fiscal responsibility, something detached and safe, something that might bring the hearing back to familiar ground. But Jasmine didn't let the moment escape. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply turned her head calmly, directly, and said, "I'm not finished." The words landed like a gavel, firm, undeniable, not a request in assertion. The congressman leaned back, surprised. The usual tactics weren't working today. This wasn't grandstanding. It wasn't theater. It was someone using her voice like it was built for something more than sound bites. "You had your time," she said, her tone as still as steel. "Now let me use mine to speak for the people who never get a seat in this room." And with that, the whole floor shifted again. Because what do you say to that? How do you rebut someone whose only demand is space to represent the unheard? Jasmine wasn't speaking for attention. She was speaking in place of all the voices drowned in red tape. For the mother working 2 jobs who couldn't afford to drive here and testify. For the teenager who's never met his city council rep but knows what gentrification feels like. For the teacher using her own paycheck to buy her students lunch. She wasn't asking for favor. She was demanding fairness. And as she kept speaking, the room didn't push back. Not because it agreed, but because, for once, it understood that silence wasn't surrender. It was respect. And no one dared take that from her. And she did. For 10 full minutes, the room belonged to her. No interruptions, no redirects, no veiled sarcasm from across the aisle. Just her voice steady, exact, and deeply human. Every word carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it refused to be softened. She didn't waver. She didn't pause for reaction. She didn't slow down to explain her right to speak. She poured 10 minutes of truth into a space that had long been allergic to it and dared them to look away. She spoke about policies not as abstract ideas, but as lived consequences. She reminded them that behind every vote cast in this chamber was a ripple felt in someone's real life, a child, a worker, a neighbor, a forgotten name in a forgotten zip code. She peeled back the layers of political convenience, exposed the easy narratives they'd built around poverty, crime, education, and showed them the people underneath, the ones whose stories never make it into campaign speeches because they aren't shiny or simple. By the time she was done, something had changed. The same people who once glanced at their phones or whispered among themselves were now leaning in, not to challenge, but to listen. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, feeling the weight of their own detachment. Some looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time as the woman they'd tried to box into a label, but as the one they couldn't ignore. And all of them, every last one, stayed quiet. Because no one interrupts a voice that doesn't shake even when it should. When it ended, it didn't feel like a political speech. It felt like a shift, a line drawn, a door kicked open. The clip didn't just go viral, it ignited. It burned through timelines, through group chats, through communities used to being talked about but rarely spoken for. Teachers played it between lessons. Mothers watched it at kitchen tables, nodding silently. Teenagers passed it between phones in cafeterias, whispering, "She said it." It wasn't trending because it was loud. It was trending because it was real. People didn't just watch, they felt it in their chest, in the part of themselves that had long been told to stay quiet, to be polite, to let the powerful have the floor. Jasmine Crockett didn't take the mic to perform. She took it like it was a lifeline and made it one. Every second of her speech said the thing millions had wanted to scream but never had the stage to say. And what made it unforgettable wasn't how hard she hit it was, how boldly she stood. She didn't insult. She didn't escalate. She didn't play to the camera. She just refused to be small. Refused to shrink so others could feel comfortable. Refused to wait her turn in a system designed to never give her one. That's what spread. Not just a clip, not just a moment, a message. You don't have to yell to be powerful. You just have to speak like you know you belong. And when you do, the world listens, even the ones who tried not to. Back in her office, away from the screens, the trending hashtags, the buzz, Jasmine Crockett didn't bring it up. She didn't refresh her feed. She didn't ask for stats or check if the clip hit 1 million or 10. Her staff whispered about the traction, showed each other the comments, the headlines, the stitched videos. But she didn't even glance. She was at her desk, highlighter in one hand, policy draft in the other, quiet, focused, unmoved. Because for her, the speech wasn't the goal. It wasn't the destination. It was just one stop on a longer, harder road. Her words had shaken a room, reached a nation, but that didn't change the housing crisis she was writing a bill to fix. It didn't feed the families she'd just spoken about. It didn't erase the system still swallowing people whole. And she knew it. She knew that applause doesn't fix broken cities, that headlines don't heal ignored neighborhoods. That viral doesn't mean victory, not unless it leads to something real. So while the world reacted, while reporters called for statements and influencers posted quotes over black and white clips of her face, she got back to work, sentence by sentence, amendment by amendment, fighting not for attention, but for impact. Because in her world, the real power isn't in what you say when the cameras are on, it's in what you do after they turn off. And that's the part they never see, the grind, the paper cuts, the tireless, thankless effort of turning truth into change. But Jasmine sees it, lives it, and that's why she never stopped moving. Because her moment wasn't the mic drop, it was what came next. They tried to shut her down. With rules. With tone. With the quiet violence of being ignored. They cut off her sentences, rolled their eyes, redirected the agenda hoping she'd fold like others had. But Jasmine Crockett didn't just rise. She stood like the truth had been aching to speak through her for years. She didn't storm the room. She didn't demand respect. She earned it, with the kind of presence that makes even power look away. And the ones who thought they could outlast her, they found themselves leaning in first in disbelief, then in discomfort, then in something they hadn't expected. Attention. She didn't beg for a voice. She claimed it. She didn't chase approval. She dragged accountability into the light and dared it to blink. She made them listen not because she forced them, but because silence became impossible around her. Every word, calm and clear, chipped away at their excuses, at their distance, at their comfort. She didn't just expose the gap between policy and reality, she made them feel it. And that silence that followed her final word, that wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a system realizing it had been seen. It was the echo of everything they never wanted to confront, now ringing in chambers built to muffle it. It still echoes, in their boardrooms, in their town halls, in their discomfort. Because Jasmine didn't come to play politics. She came to make sure silence would never feel safe again.